All right, well, thank you for sticking with us over the break. We are back with our energy panel, and we'll be talking about energy systems and transitions. And I think we got everybody introduced, and except Chantel, do you have her?
Well, we haven't Marvin yet.
Oh, and Marvin?
Do you want to? You could just read the little case they're joining in now. Did you bring them?
Actually don't.
Okay. You want to talk for a minute? I'll grab them.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I guess we're going to recap some of the conversations that we have when we're talking about, energy systems and this massive transition. You have a lot of talk about, climate change, and you got a lot of talk about fossil fuels. And so, this transition, I think we have some great panelists here that are going to be able to answer some of these questions that we have. And so, once Shelley gets back over here, I don't want her to trip on anything over there. But we have two panelists that we want to introduce still.
All right. So we have Bryan Lawley. He just spoke. Marvin, Nash, Aaron, Ratner, Damian, Beauchamp, I think he's online, and Kevin Kitz. And then Chantel Green. So Bryan is the president of EGT Solar. Marvin Nash is the co-founder of Encore Green Environmental. Aaron Ratner is the president of Cross River Infrastructure Partners. Damian Beauchamp is the chief development officer at Eight Rivers Capital. Kevin Kitz is the CEO of KitzWorks. And then Chantel Green, new up here. So she is the vice chairwoman of the executive committee of the Nez Perce Tribe, and also the Nez Perce Tribe's Department of Natural Resources Planner, right?
Former
former.
vice chairman.
Okay, there you go. You've done a bunch of things. You just have to look these people up on LinkedIn or go to their websites.
Yeah, I'm going to stand up for a second so I can see Aaron. I think I'd like to start off with a question for Aaron about in this energy transition. Where are we now? I guess. How is he's working, doing some projects in North Dakota as well. How do we go from a fossil fuel auto-centric economy to, really embracing this transition into a multifaceted, dynamic energy systems approach?
Well, that's a pretty broad question. So
I know that
let me.
I started
see if I
with a
can
big one.
Unpack that in a couple of sections. There's the price of carbon specific to this summit. There's the electrification of everything, and then there's the grid. So on the price of carbon right now, the 45Q tax credit that is paid to companies who capture and either sequester or use carbon for EOR values a ton of carbon at somewhere between $35 to $50 a ton. That is failing the industry right now. It's not enough money to incentivize projects to be going into the ground quickly enough to hit any of the climate targets that we've set out for ourselves. It particularly in the sense that capital needs to come from tax equity investors, which is often a cumbersome part of the capital stack. So the price of carbon needs to go up. We're seeing that in Canada, we're seeing that in Europe. So it feels like directionally in the US that's going to happen. That will be a big catalyst for large-scale carbon capture projects and also smaller-scale industry initiatives around decarbonization, like procurement of cement that only has low carbon footprint, or procurement of commodities or consumer goods that only have low carbon footprint. The electrification of everything would be the second thing I think is on its way. And one of the most fascinating parts of the energy transition is that despite how optimistic everybody is, we still underestimate how fast technology is actually going to bring the cost curves down. And so, it feels like every 3 years somebody looks at the Bloomberg New Energy Finance cost curves and feels like we're shocked at how much faster they've come down than we thought. So it would be wise to anticipate over the next 3 to 5 years, with the power of software and AI coming on, that cost curves are going to come down even farther, which will hopefully catalyze deployment. Certainly in the electric fueling stations or electric charging station space, that seems to be going quite quickly. And then the third thing was really grid resiliency. And, this is something that the Biden administration is taking very seriously. Jigar Shah talks about it a lot, where, we have to get our grid integrity up significantly in order to transmit electricity, just like we've done with natural gas and petroleum, so that we can produce electricity in the most cost-efficient locations and transmit it around the country rather than being dependent on more location-specific production methods. But I think those three things are probably the trends that we're keeping a very close eye on, and they're probably all moving faster than we're aware of right now.
Well, thank you for that, Aaron. I know that was a kind of a loaded question there, but I guess we'll try to make it more localized, and maybe I'll start going this way. When we're talking about renewable energy, and I guess, Chantel, you're kind of in a little bit more remote area. What have you guys done, on the reservation or in northern Idaho, to really start this transition, I guess you can say, and prepare for, just the renewable economy, I guess, for you guys?
Yes, thank you. So our transition is very, very new, even though we've existed, and we refer everything back to, we've explained a lot of the nature versus people and social and economic aspects to a lot of the things that we're doing here and a lot of the innovations that are moving forward. And we identify that as traditional ecological knowledge. And our transition story is very, very new. Our part is basically developing our own net zero plan, and that's currently underway right now. And we just finished our first solar project, and we did work through Revolution out in McCall, Idaho, to partner with, and mainly that was due to, because we were actually looking at workforce training and development and actually getting behind this service learning model and training our own tribal members to be completely staffed. All of our staff did our own work. So we got behind that. So we were able to actually take close to 50 folks that were not working, even though we are tribal, we're still residents or Idahoans of Idaho, and that were not working during the pandemic. So that was a big, huge thing. That was a big, huge accomplishment for us, to employ tribal members to get educated in the solar industry. And within that, we were also able to supply women in the industry. That hasn't been a big, huge thing that's been happening, but that was a big, huge push for us, for our tribal members and women all together. That's a big, huge diversity piece. Developing some of the other projects, just like some of the other organizations, putting our projects together with our renewable energy to our agriculture and everything that's within our jurisdiction to basically start pushing us towards our own zero carbon emissions. And so everything within my jurisdiction, I'm working with 770,000 acreage, where I can actually start applying that. And to new infrastructure, we have different complexes where I'm not state regulated. So some of our complexities are a little bit different. The legalities are different. The permitting systems are a little bit different, but that gives us a larger demographic, if you will. So as of right now, my reach could be nationwide, and that's also working from basically tribe to tribe or sovereign to sovereign. So right now I could actually reach, to do our own net zero plan, helping everybody else transition, or I guess the tribes transition out from their own net zero plan or whatever it is, natural resources wise, that they have to transition out to electrification, solar, geothermal, everything that involves, your culture, and that brings it back to our cultural nature nexus, and being able to get everybody to carbon zero. And a big, huge push in the Pacific Northwest is that goal of 5,311 to be the offset to hydropower. Obviously, our culture is to be based around, salmon recovery and environmental justice. So that's kind of our push and a big, huge part of our transition. So, thank you.
Gotcha. And so we got one guy who's in oil and gas region, and I'm very interested on the Wyoming perspective, because in North Dakota we drill for oil and gas is a byproduct, and associated gas comes up with it. But in Wyoming, you guys drill for gas. And so what is, I know coming out of the pandemic, prices were floor level. I mean, I don't even know how companies made it in Wyoming. So what does the energy transition look like for you?
Well, thank you, Jason, and it's a really good, it's a challenging question. It's a good question. The transition overall is not just Wyoming based, but it's North Dakota based, it's Texas based. several of the groups, Environmental Defense Fund, some of these people that we should all have concerns about methane gas, flare gases. A lot of transformation is being done to take that gas, not flare it into the air, convert it. Baker Hughes, GE, several groups are converting that into an energy source. There's a huge amount of that gas being used for data mining, for Bitcoin. And so there's a lot of very innovative ideas that are coming. One of the big challenges that we see in Wyoming is that we don't, personally, our company does not even talk about carbon credits. We talk about carbon assets. And we've completely redefined the thought process. And so the conversion is going to have to be, carbon credits, are they going to become a commodity? You know, and one of the transitions with oil and gas is it's a commodity. So it's a supply and demand issue. And so because of that, its marketing potential is very volatile from time to time. So that the transition needs to be, and our, you know, in Wyoming, our governor just announced that in a partnership with Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, we're going to build a nuclear power plant. It's on the books. We don't know exactly where we're going to build it. Our governor just set aside $12 million to take care of abandoned wells, which are an environmental impact, not in a good way, but we're going to start converting those. We have the only permits in the United States to take byproduct produced water, treat it to DEQ environmental standards, and ground apply it, which gives us more soil health, which gives us, you know, you grow more grass, you take the bad stuff out of the air, it goes into the ground, and it comes out as oxygen. So, and we're working on those things in other states, but Wyoming is being extremely innovative about saying, okay, we understand the concerns about fossil fuel. But the reality of it is nearly everybody listening to us or everybody that came to this conference got here and I didn't see anybody tie their horses up outside. So we all got here in some type of fossil fuel vehicle, airplane, or whatever. So we've worked with the state. We did a podcast, and the governor actually did an opening for us and stuff, and he talked about the importance of the cooperation. So reality is fossil fuel's not going away tomorrow. It may adjust, it may change, but let's all work together to facilitate that change. You know, because I come from an agriculture and an energy background. Because you're in the fossil fuel realm, you're not an evil person. Because you're in agriculture and you run cattle or you have a feedlot type operation or mass production, you're not an evil individual. But the attack has been so severe that we've drawn lines instead of all sitting down at the table and saying, I don't agree with everything you're doing at the feedlot, so you're a bad person, or I mean, people don't realize Liberty Oil and some of our fracking companies, they've gone totally electric. They're not even burning fossil fuel. They use, when I was working, when we were fracking wells and hauling sand, we learned how to reduce our fleet by 15 to 30 trucks, all because of the emissions. So in Wyoming, we're working for camaraderie and partnerships to do the right thing. And I think that's one of our big pushes. And I think that should be the big push in North Dakota, in Texas, Oklahoma. We all have to say, it's not going to go away today. You know, oil's $72 today. Maybe our North Dakota guy can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think oil was $72 today. That's higher than it's been, a lot higher. So, there's a lot of money being made. But Exxon, just last week, they had some board of directors that got booted off and some new people got put in simply on environmental, social governances and those kind of things. So I could go on and on about this, but I think the main thing is Wyoming and all the other fossil fuel states are looking to cooperate. And sometimes we have to help them figure out how to cooperate because they've kind of always been, hey, we're the oil company and this is the way we do it. And that doesn't work anymore. And so we're having to see that transition of communication.
And I think that's a cultural piece. And this may be, I don't know, a Damian question, but to go off of what you were saying, the U.S. economy is expected to lose $4 trillion in GDP if the infrastructure investment gap is not addressed by 2025. You know, and so I think you guys, maybe even Aaron or Damian, like, do you want to give a shot at, you know, how do we, I mean, this is out of much higher than my pay grade, I guess you could say, but how do you catalyze that infrastructure investment?
I'd like to, Aaron, if you'd like to speak to that. I've heard you do some interesting webinars to date on the subject, so.
Okay, thanks. I'm happy to share my thoughts on that. You know, I think at the moment, so in addition, you know, I just spoke briefly about the price of carbon and how that needs to change in order to catalyze the industry. I think if you look at infrastructure in the United States, there's regulation and there's capital availability, and those two factors are really what get people out of bed and to take the risk to develop projects, which is how all this gets started, right? Somebody's got to wake up in the morning and decide they want to spend their day trying to make something happen. On the regulatory side, it feels like directionally things are moving in a positive way across the industry. The cost of waste disposal is going up. The holes in the ground are filling up. States are banning organics out of landfills. You know, that all seems to be moving in the right direction. So as long as that continues, hopefully the legislation around how you get permits and how you get these projects in the ground will continue to be streamlined. You know, nuclear being a great example. I mean, the nuclear industry hasn't built a new nuclear power plant in quite a long time. 20% of our electricity comes from nuclear. It's very clean. There are risks associated with the waste disposal, but it's a very clean form of energy. But it's very painful. And the gentleman just was talking about a nuclear plant that two of the richest people in the world want to go build in Wyoming, which is a very permit-friendly state. It's still going to take them about 10 years. That's not going to work. So it's got to get easier. And what's going to drive that is ultimately going to be consumers backed into corporates who are then going to force capital down, the cost of capital down. So if you start with consumers, you have to ask yourself, how long is it going to be before every consumer product has a carbon footprint on it? The apple you buy at the supermarket, where did it come from? What's the carbon footprint? The food you bought from another country, the clothing you bought from another country. So consumers are across the board demanding decarbonized products, whether it's the packaging of the product, the actual product itself, the supply chain, the whole thing. That consumer demand is going to start to trickle into corporate behavior, which is then going to force investments in the supply chain, which is going to make it easier for developers of sustainable infrastructure projects at small and large scale to find customers for their services and get that in the ground, which will then catalyze capital to come into the sector. Right now, there's a whole lot of venture money flying into the sector, which is great. There will certainly be some blood in the water, but you know, it's great for people to take risk. There's a lot of debt out there for projects, but the project equity level, the place where people are taking risk at the project level still has a bit of a dearth of capital. And so figuring out ways to incentivize investors to start investing in these technologies a little bit earlier than normal is going to be something that no one's really figured out yet, but certainly I think there are smart people spending time on it. Schmidt Futures, Pritzker Foundation, Prime Coalition, Third Derivative in Colorado. Those are all very intelligent groups with smart young people trying to figure out how to close that gap, and that will also be really catalytic for the sector.
Yeah, it just seems like a huge challenge. And when you think, comparing 2015 numbers, I think 8% of energy sources are renewable in 2015, and then 2020, I think it went up to 12%. How quickly can we scale? I mean, that 5 years, we didn't seem like we covered a whole lot of ground, but I think capacity installed, it was quite a bit. But how do we make this go faster? I mean, I know, Bryan, you were talking about solar, and, we're having materials shortages on batteries. And if we're talking about infrastructure upgrades with, grid storage, how big of a gap are we looking at here?
Part of the lag that we've seen over the 5 years in rollout of specifically carbon capture-based technologies is due in part to the regulatory uncertainty that existed around 45Q, and that's been shored up. And I think that what we're seeing in the kind of private equity sector is more assurance and confidence on their end that those policies are going to be in place. And I think those provide an upside. And as was mentioned, everybody having their hand in the pot of that 45Q can stifle the financial uplift that can give to projects, because it's going to be critical that through solving an environmental problem, we don't create an economic problem. And so the other piece on the carbon capture side of things is, it's impossible to really slow climate change if you don't physically touch the CO2 molecules and you just turn the other way and say, oh no, that's not acceptable. We're going to march down the road on a purely renewables platform. In fact, I think that the people who are on a purely renewables platform might be the best to step up and pay the extra $2 for the product that has a lower CO2 intensity, because we certainly can't expect the bulk of the US population or the global population to take on a climate cost problem when there's a significant portion that are already accepting elevated costs. And in fact, sometimes that acceptance goes to the wayside once they realize just how elevated costs become, like we're seeing predicted in Arizona on the electricity side of the market. Going back to the permitting piece and talking about Coyote Clean Power, what I've found phenomenally efficient, and I will clap all day for all of these sovereign and tribal nations, is the ability to get through the bureaucracy by working and partnering with a group like that, who own and control their lands in such a way that the permitting process is not backlogged, and it can be far more efficient. And so the leadership from that sector, I think, is phenomenal. And, I've spent the last 6 months speaking to people all around the world about energy resources and clean energy for the Zero Carbon Fuels Initiative that I've been working on with Clean Air Task Force. And what I've heard is a resounding, unified message that the pie of energy consumption is not getting smaller, it's only growing. And it just so happens that some of these renewables seem to be filling a gap. But that's why we're seeing record high CO2 levels coming out of the pandemic, is because we can't turn the blind eye to fossil fuels. Those who come in and do carbon capture and focus on the fossil fuel sector, those are going, I promise you, those will be the heroes of the climate solution. Absolutely. The people who stood, dug their heels in and said, no, these things, they need to be cleaned up. They're the most cost-effective form of energy in the world, and there's a way to do them cleanly.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and especially being, from North Dakota, there's only a few qualms I guess I have with the industry that I would like to see their standards raised. Like, I understand that there's tremendous value and tremendous energy in natural gas and oil, and we've been used to it being so cheap because we're not paying for the externalities. And so once you factor in at some point in time, you have to factor in those costs, and obviously that's what carbon markets are doing. But when you talk about just flaring in general, for me, it's like, well, you don't want to see that because what's coming out of those flare stacks. And so you're only burning off most of it, so when you're talking about air toxics, I don't want to breathe those. It's just that simple. And so, 3-4 years ago, I get shamed for that. Now I'm finally able to talk about that. So we got to get past this shame culture, and into a sustainability culture, to where we can work with these oil and gas industries and say, hey, we'll help you solve your own problems. We'll fix your reputation. We need your energy. We need these sources because we consume so much. I mean, like you said, the pie is growing, and oil and gas has some of the best engineers in the world. So we need them. You know what I mean? It's not like this is going to go away and change, but we need a dynamic industry, that really cooperates and collaborates, kind of like everything that we were talking about. And so I guess it kind of goes back to a geothermal, approach, because Williston and northwestern North Dakota is very similar. It has such a high potential, but we don't have a whole lot there because it gets overshadowed, I guess you could say. And so I guess one of my questions is, where does the geothermal energy need the most support in that sense from somebody like a coordinator, I guess you could say?
Well, I think there's been several topics raised just in this panel that influence the ability to deploy geothermal. One is the carbon tax or carbon market. Is that geothermal reduces carbon all the time, and so having that as a source of income is really critical to a geothermal project. The tax laws are frankly ridiculous. Little projects, whether they're solar, whether they're geothermal, this is all set up to help large finance companies, the whole tax credit idea. It costs the taxpayers exactly the same whether it's giving the project money or issuing a tax credit, but the money handlers make a lot more money by having it be a tax credit. And so providing actual cash in lieu of tax credit, even if it's 85% of the tax credit, would help small projects, innovative projects, and help attract that kind of early stage money that Aaron has talked about. And lastly, these tax laws come and go. Like, for example, right now, wind and solar get 26% tax credit. Geothermal gets nothing. And it comes in little blocks, or it's retroactive. Well, that's not how you develop geothermal projects. These are long lead projects, and they need that knowledge that the market is going to be there, the tax credits are going to be there. This come and go stuff just really doesn't work. And so as far as oil and gas goes and the creativity of the oil and gas companies, I mean, geothermal is a perfect fit. Putting solar panels in large arrays or erecting wind turbines is all very skilled work, but it's not the core skills of the oil and gas industry. Those people are underground, and underground is geothermal, and the money isn't going because it's not scalable, because there's not market, because there's not all these things. And so really creating this market has the potential to allow the massive creativity of the oil and gas industry to come to this sector. This is never going to be a sector that power is going to be applicable everywhere, but where it is applicable, it can really benefit from that oil and gas investment, that oil and gas creativity, and that oil and gas pivot. And that's really important for jobs, for achieving the green transition, and I think these are all things that can help geothermal as one part of the solution prosper and contribute to its maximum extent.
Well, and I think it's important to kind of follow up on that, is that, the oil and gas industry in North Dakota, they can drill a 10,000 plus foot deep hole in less than 7 days now. And so it's like, what is the collaboration or the potential for geothermal? I mean, we can easily repurpose some of those things, I guess, but if the profit margin, I guess, isn't there, or the incentives aren't there, it's not going to get done.
Or the scale, right?
the scale.
So if you're a multi-billion-dollar industry, doing $100 million projects is like, poof, who cares?
Yeah.
It has to be scalable, and so this is a big part of the discussion that's going on in geothermal is how do we, and the drilling it's different. It's in traditional geothermal areas, it's much harder drilling than those 7 days, but it takes us 30 days. A well is almost all time cost.
Yeah.
It's having people and machinery moving that is expensive, not.
Jason, I just have to say that it used to take us 30 days to drill those 10,000 foot wells too. I mean, when I first went to work in the energy industry, we were drilling, 12,000, 10,000 foot wells, and it took 30 days. And we worked with the crews, we worked with the drilling companies, the muddy, everybody got better. And I was actually hired to figure out how to survive at $35 and $40 oil. That's what my mandate was. We can't pay $300,000 to move a rig, but you got to move the rig. So everything became better. We became more efficient. And I think we're at the cusp of, both with solar and with geothermal and all of these other industries and sources of energy, I think we're at the very cusp of getting better at what we do. You know, I'm not a tax guy. I'm a free enterprise guy from the get-go. But I think free enterprise, I think the investor world, somebody said earlier today, we vote with our dollars. I think investors are going to get make better investment decisions. Yeah, we want everybody to make money. Hey, I want our dividends to come in and be great. But at the same time, I want a social conscience. And I want whoever I'm giving my money to, whether it's geo or solar or energy, I want them to vote with a social conscience also. And so there's a lot of, and this is what's so great about this summit. And I can't tell you enough. I'm not just patting you on the back, but this is really great because the main objective is how do we work together to achieve that goal? And you know, you've got landowners involved. There's a lot of other people involved other than just the energy industry. There's the landowner side of it. There's the engineering side of it. There's the kids in the high school side of it. What are we leaving them? And so, you know, hats off for what you've pulled together here. But I really don't want us to go, you know, no, we are making positive steps. And these kind of summits help us identify those. And so I think that's where we're really seeing, doesn't take 30 days to drill a 10,000-foot well anymore. 12 days, we've got it knocked out. We do it faster, safer, less money, do a better job with the other assets. Everybody's working on your flare gas issue. It's a directive that needs to be taken care of. And, you know, so yeah. But I think we're getting a lot better at doing that. And again, you know, like for these two guys, they're filling in I was at a summit in Frisco, okay, I'll be brief, but it was a water summit, first time everybody had been out, and everybody kept describing it as the Wild West. All of this water stuff is the Wild West. That's what these guys are going through on permitting. Your engineers at the city level, they don't have a clue what you're talking about most of the time when you talk about solar and geothermal, and they're like, huh? You know, and yet we need a 15-day turnaround or a 12-day turnaround or a 2-year turnaround. But we have to help them understand what the objectives are at the end of the game. And so it's an educational factor. They're scared of change. When we started talking about taking produced water, you couldn't imagine, oh, it's got this in it, it's got that in it, it's going to be the end of the world. And I said, no, it's really not. You know, it's clean, and the test says that it's clean, and so let's work together. But that's the communication point, the social impact point, the things that you have brought to this conference are the change maker. And so, again, I see those things happening. I don't want anybody out there listening to think, oh my God, we're never going to get this done. It's a heavy lift. It's a really heavy lift. And it's aggravating when you can't get a permit. I used to try to move a rig across North Dakota, and there were some highways during the frost, I couldn't even go down the road. So I'd lose 3 weeks with a piece of equipment if I didn't orchestrate my logistics right. That's really frustrating. But it was for the good of the roads, and I just had to plan better. So we're all getting there thanks to the collaboration and the cooperation. But yeah, it can be a real challenge. So can I kind of change the direction? Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
All of these things we're talking about at this collaboration and stuff, what do you see that needs to change and be implemented to get us to that end game?
Instead of me reaching out and social entrepreneurs reaching out to the corporations and the government, they reach out to us. You know, say, help us solve your problems. Because I've been doing events for 8 years, And I've rarely had anybody come out and say, hey, we want you to do another event in California, or come to DC and do an event, and teach our politicians about these things. And so eventually it's got to get to the point, where organizers, community developers, social entrepreneurs, I guess you'd say, will eventually be reached out to and say, hey, we see your value, here. Like, we see that you can connect, you're a catalyzer, you're doing these things, instead of having to go beat on everybody's door and, bug them, of saying, hey, we're doing this, begging them for sponsorships or doing these things, to where these corporations have massive problems. Like, to where, give us an opportunity to help you solve them and go outside of your organizations. Because oftentimes, it's not corporations and it's not brands that innovate. It's people within those corporations and those brands that innovate. They're the ones that are thinking of new ways of doing things. And so I'm not saying I'm that guy, but I can find those people to do that. And so I would say that we need the major corporations to think outside of their scopes of work. Even the government, to where they're supposed to be public servants. But I'd talked to over 100, different government officials. We don't got any here, And so that's a problem. That's a cultural problem.
I'd like to hear Chantel on this as well. What do you see are some of our obstacles?
Yeah, thank you. It's quite literally, not to just reiterate everything he's saying, but it's, I guess to go back as, when I was the former, or being the former vice chairman of the Nez Perce tribe now, is that we are beating down the door to actually advocate, to get everybody to actually listen, when actuality is that all their problems, they're out here publicly stating, and they have access to the funding to actually make that big change, or they have access to actually mandate it. And it's in their legislation, and actually trying to partner. That was a big, huge part of the work that I was doing before, was actually, I can help me help you. And that's really what it is as of right now, is what he's stating, is that we have the answers. There's the problem, there's a solution, and you're in that direction, if they're willing to listen. Partnership and collaboration is a big, huge thing of what our tribal nations are behind. It's not, we're advocating, but it's because we're advocating for future generations, and that has to be understood. So when I was speaking about, our culture, nature nexus, it's because we always think everything in circular green economy type of thinking. And at this point in time, yes, we've kind of scaled things back to actually adapt to, climate change, the social economic pieces that we're having to deal with now, climate change and the adversity that's the effects of it. That's a huge part of why we do what we do, and actually having to ask you just to save our planet that you live on as well. Your children are not going to have a planet to live on. We shouldn't actually have to ask for that. That we have the solutions, and if you're just willing to listen, partnership and collaboration, and move in that direction with those solutions, that's all we're asking. But yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. If I may.
Yeah, come on
okay.
in.
Yeah, the one thing I want to add on all this is, I always take the approach of, I'm a salesman at heart, love to sell, and when I'm trying to sell something to somebody and they're not buying it, what I've learned to do is I go away and I say, I don't think I understand this person well enough. I don't think I understand this entity well enough. I don't think I understand their problem well enough. And one of the things that 8 Rivers has been really good at is, one, you have to have a tremendous amount of persistence. And with a tremendous amount of persistence, you can run out of money. And that's an issue for all innovators. But when you target and look at groups like large corporations and say they're just not hearing it, my suggestion is to better understand what fits and makes sense in their mind. You're right, because those blinders are on, and those blinders are centuries, years old.
Yep.
But if you can understand what fits within those blinders, you can activate large amounts of capital. And so we've done that with the net power piece, with $50 million from McDermott, with $100 million from Exelon, with an undisclosed amount of dollars from Oxy, right? And now we've got 3 projects, and this is kind of getting back to the positivity that we're making the difference, right? It's happening.
Yep.
because we've got this project in Colorado and we've partnered with the Southern Ute. And you're absolutely right. That's an example of finding a customer, in this case, a partner who already is aligned with our vision around a circular economy, around environmental stewardship while pursuing economically advantaged projects. So you find those non-traditional niche customers in these early days, and they help move things really fast. And then we go to places like Illinois and we find ADM, and we find Warwick Capital out of the UK who's looking to activate dollars in carbon capture. And we develop projects to the point on being structured on markets rather than tax incentives. And we develop projects that make economic sense on a standalone basis. It's not easy, it's really, really hard. Not only to build those projects, but then to find people who believe in them. So the persistence piece is, as Calvin Coolidge would say, is omnipotent, right? It is the most important piece to this whole puzzle. But we're finding that this capital is being activated. And what's really exciting, and I think there will be plenty more opportunities for forums like this with larger audiences, as you start to see sovereign wealth funds like Temasek making large $600 million commitments with BlackRock. And these are going to be focused on CO2, on the fossil industry, and how do you keep those industries thriving in a cleaner, more environmentally responsible way without bankrupting whole economies, nations, and communities. It's extremely difficult, but I think that we're making a tremendous amount I'm seeing massive movement like I've never seen in the years that I've been in the clean energy space. So it is positive, it is exciting, and I think we're kicking butt and taking names as we go. And by the way, this event, absolutely wonderful. The amount of people that you got to attend this virtually, I don't know how many are in person, but I saw a tremendous movement online, and I just think it's phenomenal.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Damian. Like I said, we feel like this is the start. But I do have one more question, and I think it's an Aaron question. So what is the role of hydrogen in this energy transition? I hear a lot of talk about hydrogen on both sides, good and bad. And is it really the transitional fuel or energy source that we're needing as a solution?
I think certainly hydrogen's going to be integral to getting us to where we need to be, and it's an incredibly efficient way of generating heat and power and energy in certain situations. I think when you look across the landscape of the energy transition, there are very few things that are really truly binary, but there are spaces where hydrogen is going to prove to be incredibly efficacious. One of those is in heavy duty trucking, particularly with vehicles that have ancillary functions like cement trucks or garbage trucks, where the battery is going to run out, and where a traditional battery electric vehicle at 60% efficiency is going to start to slow down. Your hydrogen truck just isn't going to do that. So for vehicles like that, for mining vehicles in challenging weather conditions up north, hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles will be really critical. We also see some really interesting things happening in dual fuel conversions. We have a technology partner that is working with us to convert a pilot of 70 trucks with a big industrial materials company from diesel to co-firing diesel and hydrogen. So it's not a perfectly clean solution, but when you look at this transition, you have to think about the capex that's in the market right now, and in transportation in particular, there's a lot of ships and a lot of trucks that were built in the last 20 years that have a long life left, and to just landfill them and go replace them with a shiny new battery or hydrogen fuel cell electric version is really expensive and actually not very environmentally responsible. So finding a way to extend the useful life of vehicles may in fact be the lowest carbon path forward in certain situations. So hydrogen as a dual fuel is very interesting to us. It's cheap, it's easy, it's not risky, it's pragmatic. You can do it very quickly. We like that a lot. One of the challenges about hydrogen is really on-site production. People can get their heads around battery electric because everybody plugs something in, at night. Everyone understands where electricity is coming from. It comes from the wall. So nobody really worries about running out of electricity for their electrical car. Companies are concerned about running out of hydrogen if they're going to transition to hydrogen trucks for their fleets. And so finding on-site hydrogen production, which is being done by a couple of technology companies here in the US, is going to be really critical, in deploying both the production and the use at the same time will be an integral way of getting that forward. And I think the other way that hydrogen is going to play a major role here is in ammonia. Right now, most of the ammonia that's produced in the world comes from China. There's also ammonia coming out of Russia and Trinidad. So for those molecules to go from the point of production all the way to the United States for fertilizer or for marine transportation has a huge carbon footprint and a huge energy suck on the carbon efficiency of the intention. So we think that large-scale hydrogen production using nuclear to make green ammonia for marine transportation, which is effectively an almost limitless market when you look at the size of the marine ammonia demand. We think that's going to be a huge opportunity, and hydrogen in shipping will play a very key role, because currently most ships in the world are burning bunker fuel, which is such a low-grade fuel. It's often dumped in the desert. It has no value otherwise. So hydrogen is going to play a key role in some specific sectors. There are other spaces where it will lose out, small light-duty vehicles, but it's not going to be an answer for everything. It will be part of the answer.
Yeah, that's a great answer there. I appreciate that. We were this close to having INL here. I had 3 meetings with them, and we just kind of ran out of time. So we're building a relationship with them through the Trailhead, and so they should be here next year. So we'll definitely follow up on that, Aaron. But do we have anything else?
Any final thoughts, you guys?
Any final thoughts? I know we just covered a lot right there.
No, he does, I can tell.
I know
You're
Marvin's
thinking
itching for something.
Yeah.
Come on, Marvin.
Yeah.
What do
I
you
can
got
see
for
it.
us?
No, I just
Bakersfield next?
yeah. I think we're going to Bakersfield. I think we're going to Baker. What do y'all think? Bakersfield, California, Dwight Yoakam or somebody. Let's have a good back to the earth concert and get everybody together under one teepee and have a really good conversation and get something done. You like that idea? Yeah, I think so. And also again, the pathway. If you study agriculture, 4-H came about when they tried to grow hybrid seed. And the farmers would say, I'm not going to pay $30 for a bag of seed. So they gave all the little kids hybrid seed. The kids planted it next to Daddy's mono seed. And this stalk came up and it had 2 ears of corn on it. And Daddy said, well, wait a minute, I need some of that. So I think one of the big demands is, how do we really reach our kids with a message that fossil fuel is not demonized, energy is not a bad thing. If I want to protest something, I really have 3 options if I'm an environmentalist. I can eat vegan, I can sort my trash, and I can go to a protest. But you know what I could have done today? I could have come to a carbon summit, and I could have learned. And then I could take that back and go forward. So I could talk about what you're doing forever, but I think that's what we all need to walk out of here with is, how do I do a better job of communicating to my young people that we need to do things in a climate wellness attitude and atmosphere? Whether it's geo, whether it's solar, whether it's energy, whether it's the things that you're doing of inclusion with all the people, putting 50 people to work, that's a great thing. How do we expand that part of it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, what this is kind of designed for. I mean, this is the cooperation, the collaboration, the intergenerational communication. And I like events because you can set some common goals. It's like, what would we like to learn here? We can put things into an agenda, in a format, to where it's like, oh, a lot of people are asking about these questions. Let's go find the expert and the authority on that. And that's the coordination side. And so, I guess if there's nothing else, was there, Chantel? Did I interrupt you there? I didn't. Okay. But I guess that pretty much wraps up the.
I think we need to just think about, who do we want to meet? You know, I love it how you're calling people out. You're like, they're going to be here next year, But I think we need to talk about that. It doesn't always have to be on a stage. Who do we want to meet? What conversations do we need to be having? Have we reached out about those conversations? You can get told no. I remember one time I was interviewing the top Girl Scout cookie seller in Idaho. She was just amazing. I was like, I want to be her when I grow up, and she was like 9. And we were like, how are you so successful? You've sold like 10x. And she said, I ask. If you don't ask, they can't say yes. And we were all like, yeah, if you don't ask, they can't say yes. So, sometimes it's a slower journey with some people, but sometimes you ask, and next thing you know, you're having the Zoom or sitting at the table with coffee, or, flying to meet somebody and having these conversations. Who do we need to be talking to? What are some of those calls to action as far as moving this forward?
Well, and I think, from this first event, I personally got an email back from the CEO of Nestle, Mark Schneider. And he connected me with his global VP of affairs and said, hey, we don't have the bandwidth to come to Idaho, but if you make it to the Netherlands, there's a strong likelihood that we can.
Oh, sure, if Leonardo DiCaprio comes,
Well,
they
if
want to come to that.
if Leo comes, we don't ever have to worry
I want to
about
go to that
anything
one
again.
too.
And so I think it really, it's kind of tough doing the local, regional, national, international, kind of focus. But, I tried our best to, try to hit on some of those things. And so we're going to take this framework and this foundation that we built here, and hopefully we can connect more with Idaho, the corporations, the politicians, and say, hey, we're not, this is non-political in that sense. I can get myself riled up, about things, but it doesn't mean I dislike you or I want to call you out. That's not the point of these things, because that doesn't get things done. Right. We know what that does, and I've experienced that in oil and gas in North Dakota. And so it does not work. And so it's like, hey, how can we work on your problems? How can I help? And oftentimes for these big corporations, it's workforce development and it's public awareness. It's like, can you tell people what we're doing well, and then can you get us the people or train the people or find the employees that we need? Mm-hmm. And so we can do both of those things. We've done a lot of job fairs, we've done all these sporting events, we've done concerts. And so it's like, so we can do these things, and doing these things at a local level in your first year, it's very difficult to do these things. And for an event organizer, Shelley, how it can be. It's like a will and some enthusiasm doesn't really get it, get it done. That's how we started, I guess you could say, but I got beat up along the way.
You do. The bigger the spotlight, the bigger the spitwads. Yeah. I started a conference 10 years ago in the women's professional space, and I wanted to combine it with personal growth. Now, 10 years ago, everybody told me I was crazy. They thought that was weird. They, thought I was a witch. I don't know. It was just it was just different than anything else people were doing. And I was saying professional development and personal growth. It's connected, just like we're saying beef and vegetables. It's connected. None of these things are separate. And it's funny because at first there was so much negativity. Now, a lot of other conferences are saying the same thing. Oh, professional development and personal growth. So kind of makes me feel good that I kind of want to, call a few people out and say, hey, you were giving me a hard time. But it's neat because at first you're weird and then you become that change. But you have to step out, and everybody's not going to agree or be like, that's wonderful, because it's new and they don't know what they don't know. But they're never going to know if we don't share. And they're never going to know if we don't have some bravery and take some steps.
And I think it's really important to say that the United States is very culturally diverse, especially by regions. I know Damian, he's out in North Carolina. I spent 4 months in Wilmington at the end of 2019. And I thought that was such a cool community. It's right on the coast. It's kind of the south meets the north, and then you got a hippie vibe in there. But it's University of North Carolina, Wilmington. That's where we got to spend some time. And I just, you think of North Dakota, and then you think of Idaho, and then you think of Texas and California. We got to find common ground to get some of these things done.
But we do have common ground. It's called the earth,
Yeah.
right? We all want to be
Exactly.
here. We want to be healthy. We don't always know how to do that, but we're never going to know if we don't come together and mastermind those solutions. So my hat's off to you for doing this, and thank you guys so much, and also Chantel for coming today, and everybody here and online as well. Like, thank you, because blocking out time, it's one of the hardest resources for people to block out anymore. Like, we
Yeah.
think it's money, it is, but time, it's difficult to just stop and focus on being intentional on solutions.
Yeah, so I want to thank all of you guys for coming out from the bottom of my heart. Damian, Aaron, I know it looks like he clocked off, but it's this stuff is not possible without you guys. You know, so thank you for giving your messages, and
We'll be back tomorrow.
we'll be back tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll be back tomorrow with a lot more great content,
Yeah,
lots
we
of
got-
great
we're just getting warmed
speakers
up.
and panelists, and giddy up. We're going to get to it. Thank you guys so much.
Okay.